It's me again.
International best-selling YouTuber. This video is part 2 in what will become a 3-part series on the history of the Bad Boy Entertainment record label. In part 1, we left off at the introduction of Bad Boy Entertainment's soon-to-be rivalry with Death Row Records. And if you haven't watched part 1 of this series yet, I highly recommend watching that first before you watch part 2, so I will include a link to part 1 in this video as well as in the description below. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet and you like my videos, please hit that subscribe button, and why not like as well as share the video. Leave a comment, please. So this rivalry between East Coast and West Coast when it came to hip hop, it exceeded beyond just these two labels, Death Row Records and the Bad Boy label. And I think to better understand this beef, we need to kind of go back in time just a little bit. Before Bad Boy, before Suge Knight, Diddy, Death Row, all of that. So, I like to paint a picture, so I'm gonna set the scene for you guys. It's August in 1973 in the Bronx, New York, and you can't wait to get off work tonight because you and your friends have been waiting all week to go to this dance party. The room is packed, the vibe is vibing, and then you see this DJ, and this DJ's name is DJ Kool Herc, and he starts spinning the same record or 2 turntables, toggling back and forth between the two, and it's like nothing you've ever heard before. And you're not the only one that feels that way because this party is bumping. All of a sudden, the party comes alive on the dance floor and everybody's having the time of their lives. It's difficult, oftentimes impossible, to pinpoint exactly when a cultural event takes place, but this party where DJ Kool Herc spun the same record on twin turntables is often identified as the birth of hip hop. That this dance party was the spark that ignited a cultural and musical evolution that combined DJing, rapping, poetry, writing, theater, and breakdance. So many different pieces made up this cultural evolution, what would become the culture that we know of today. I list all these things because it's not just about the music. This was the birth of a culture. And by no means am I a hip hop head historian. I am a generalist historian, okay? And if I did have a specialty, it would probably be in old dead white people, not gonna lie. Medieval, early modern European white people were crazy. And honestly, I find it very interesting. So for all you hip hop heads out there, if any are watching this, maybe there's another culturally relevant historic event that has been debated as being the birth of hip hop. But based on my sources, this seems to be the pinpoint. But please let me know in the comments. So anyway, fast forward a little in time, artists like Curtis Blow, the Sugar Hill Gang, Run DMC, and Africa Bambaataa become early predecessors or pioneers of hip hop. And they're all based out of the East Coast, specifically New York. So for a while, New York was the epicenter of hip hop. But then in the 1980s, the West Coast, they started to get some traction when artists like Ice-T, Too Short, and NWA hit the scene. And that's not to say that these artists were the first to technically do it on the West Coast. It's just that West Coast hip hop really started making traction in the mainstream with these big artists. And so with the rise of West Coast hip hop into the mainstream, a rivalry of sorts began to blossom between West Coast and East Coast. New York was the birthplace of hip hop, and some amazing talent from West Coast was all of a sudden dominating the charts. And then fast forward a little bit, Death Row Records is founded by none other than Suge Knight and Dr. Dre in the year 1991. God, that makes it sound so old. In the year of our Lord, 1991, Sir Suge Knight and Sir Dre, the Doctor, founded the consortium of the Death Row. They brought a whole new innovative sound to the genre known as G-Funk. So then you've got Death Row, 1991, and then in 1993 enters Bad Boy. So when these two labels hit the scene, this rivalry between West Coast and East Coast just morphed into this highly publicized beef between these two labels. And the personification of this beef became Biggie with the East Coast and then Tupac with the West. But where did this beef start between Biggie and Tupac, specifically looking at them as individuals and not the beef as a whole? Where did it start with them? I personally didn't know much about the origin of it. Of course, I've been very familiar with the general idea of the beef, you know, the two labels, the two artists, how it ends in tragedy. And I'd also heard that the two of them were friends at a point. So it was in 1993 that Biggie and Tupac's paths would first cross. At this point, Biggie was recording his debut album, Ready to Die, and Tupac was already a platinum-selling artist. And according to the book, Original Gangsters, The Untold Story of Dr. Dre, Eazy-E, Ice Cube, Tupac Shakur, and the Birth of West Coast Rap, written by Ben Westhoff, is a very long title. Per this book, Biggie was introduced to Tupac in LA while at a local drug dealer's house party. Nothing like making new friends at a drug dealer's house party. This is where I've met some of my best friends, you know. The lore is luring. And at this drug dealer house party, the two of them had the time of their lives. The story goes that Tupac offered Biggie some green, they smoked together, had a good time. Tupac showed off some of his unloaded pew-pews that they played around with. Not the safest pastime in the world, but I digress. And then I guess they got hungry, so Pac just cooked them some steaks and french fries and made them some Kool-Aid, and they spent the night drinking and eating and playing with pew-pews and vibing. And so they formed a really nice friendship. I'm not exactly sure how, close they were. I don't know if they were BFFs, but when Biggie would come to Cali, he would sleep on Tupac's sofa, and when Tupac came to New York, he would swing by Biggie's hood and pick him up in his limo. Tupac would apparently throw dice in the neighborhood and they would just kick it, and they would perform on stage together. I've seen plenty of old clips where they're performing together on stage, and it's crazy because when you look at it in retrospect, knowing the events that would transpire, especially the disses that those two came out with, I mean, it's crazy to see them on stage like that, just vibing off each other, performing, having a ball. It's really sad. But over time, I guess you could say they kind of formed a mentor-mentee-ish relationship in addition to the friendship aspect of it. And when you think about it, this makes sense because Tupac was a newer artist, but he was already in the flow of things. He was known and successful, and Biggie, his career was just about to launch. He had just joined Bad Boy and they were getting everything lined up for him for his debut. And speaking of mentor-mentee relationships, Tupac has gone on to claim that he even influenced Biggie's style. I mean, I don't know how true that is, but I mean, he said he did. So it's also been said that at one point, Biggie even asked Tupac if he would manage him, but Tupac told him no and recommended that he stay with Diddy because he believed that Diddy would take him places, that he would be good for his career. I'm just gonna stay silent. Message! Unfortunately, their relationship would take a turn for the worst on November 3rd in 1994. Nothing would be the same from this day onward when it came to Biggie and Tupac's relationship and really hip-hop and the culture altogether. On this day, Tupac, along with 3 of his associates, arrived at Quad Recording Studios in Times Square, New York. And when they arrived, Tupac stated that he felt a bit uneasy. And this was after seeing 3 men dressed in army fatigues that he didn't recognize. But then Bad Boy recording artist Lil Cease yelled down to him that Biggie was upstairs recording with Diddy. So that made Tupac feel a little bit reassured, like, okay, my homeboy's here, like, we're good. But before Tupac and his entourage could even step into the elevator, the unknown men dressed in army fatigues pulled out 9mm pew-pews and yelled to Tupac and the entourage to get on the ground. Now, it's said that at this time, Tupac felt a bit invincible. He had a lot of bravado. Like when you think about his lyrics, his swagger, you know, the way he communicates with people. You hear a lot of stories about how he really put on this kind of like macho gangster, you know, persona. And I just find it funny as someone from Baltimore, knowing that he went to Baltimore School for the Arts. Not saying thugs can't like art. Nothing wrong with the artistic thug, but he was really feeling himself. And it's been said that part of the reason why he was feeling himself like this is because he was associating with a lot of interesting characters at this time, you know, a lot of gangsters, shot callers, you know, and he would wear really expensive jewelry. I'm talking about jewelry that costs more than what most people make annually today in 2025. And he would wear this type of jewelry in areas that he wasn't familiar with, around people he didn't know, in hoods he had nothing to do with. I wouldn't even wear my Samsung Galaxy watch in some areas around where I grew up. So just knowing that he was moving this way is crazy. Dude was really feeling it. So once the pew-pews were drawn, Tupac proceeded to grab his pew-pew. And in response to that, Tupac was pew-pewed, beaten, and robbed for his jewelry. But anyway, he stated that he was pew-pewed 5 times, including in the head and in the scrotum. But forensic evidence points to him more than likely accidentally pew-pewing himself in the scrotum, you know, when he was reaching for that pew-pew. So after all of this, he pretended to be dead and waited for his attackers to exit, and then he somehow was able to make his way to where Biggie and Diddy were in the studio. Now, per Tupac, when he encountered Biggie and Diddy after this horrible exchange, he said that they looked super guilty. He believed that this was no random robbery, but a planned attack. But Biggie and Diddy vehemently denied any involvement in the Quad Studios shooting. But whether Biggie and Diddy were responsible or not, Tupac still felt betrayed by Biggie. He felt like at the least Biggie would have known who was responsible, since this happened in his own hood. Then, just a day after the shooting, Tupac was found guilty of essay related to a crime that had taken place the following year. That charge stemmed from an incident that occurred in his hotel room where he and 3 other men were accused of essaying a young woman. And although Tupac stated he was innocent and believed he was set up, he was sentenced to 18 months to 4.5 years in prison. And while incarcerated, Tupac's finances suffered. He was broke. The lawyer fees were piling up, and his victim, she was suing for millions. And he also financially supported his family. And there was a point where things had gotten so bad financially for Tupac that his mother was going to lose the house. But then enters Suge Knight. Suge Knight, the knight in shining armor. That's what I call him. Suge Knight, the shining armor. That's so corny. I'ma stop. So if you don't know who Suge Knight is, I'm going to provide an extremely brief biography. I've already mentioned that Suge Knight was one of the co-founders of the Death Row record label. But prior to that, he was actually Dr. Dre's bodyguard. How one switches careers from bodyguard to music exec, I have no clue what that ladder looks like. But good for Suge Knight. Good for him. Suge Knight's reputation precedes him. There have been several stories circulated within and outside of the industry that demonstrates how ruthless this man was, and maybe still is. I don't know. He's in prison right now. I don't know what he's up to. And he's been described as a formidable man and having a very intimidating presence. If you know anything about Suge Knight, you've probably seen at some point the interview that Vanilla Ice did about his interaction with Suge on a balcony. And that's just one of many stories with this man and violence being the cornerstone of the story. And he's said to have had gang affiliations, and he's no stranger to legal troubles, including violent crimes. Honestly, he sounds like the Candyman of hip hop. So that's Suge Knight. And Suge saw Tupac's struggles as an opportunity. So while Tupac was in prison, Suge sent him 15 bands. And of course, Tupac was much obliged. He was very appreciative for Suge's assistance. But his assistance didn't stop there. I mean, Suge Knight really rolled out the red carpet for Tupac. But this wasn't out of the kindness of Suge's heart. You know, there's always a cost for something like this, especially when you are dealing with Suge Knight. The set of circumstances Tupac was in presented the perfect opportunity for Suge to recruit Tupac to sign with Death Row. And Suge was flying out of LA to New York to visit Tupac while he was in prison, and he hooked him up with Death Row's lawyer to help with his legal representation. And during the midst of all this, on August 3rd in 1995, during the Source Awards, Suge stepped onto the stage to accept an award for the Death Row label. And during Suge's acceptance speech, he took it upon himself to call out a certain label, actually a certain someone. He put Diddy on blast for his need to be in his artists' videos and all throughout their albums.
First of all, I'd like to thank God. Second of all, I'd like to thank my whole entire Death Row family on both sides, you know what I'm saying? I'd like to tell Tupac to keep his guards up. We ride with him. And one other thing I'd like to say, any artists out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star, and don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the video, all on the record, dancing. Come to Death Row.
And after Suge makes this very short speech where he's calling out Diddy, when Diddy goes on stage afterwards, he honestly responds very diplomatically.
Check this out. I'm the executive producer that a comment was made about a little bit earlier. But check this out. Contrary to what other people may feel, I would like to say that I'm very proud of Dr. Dre, of Death Row, and Suge Knight for their accomplishments. You know what I'm saying? I'm a positive black man, and I make music to bring us together, not to separate us, and all this East and West that needs to stop. So give it up for everybody from the East and the West that won tonight. One love. Once again, y'all, please give it up for all the nominees.
Suge spoke no lies. I mean, he was not lying, but he added unnecessary fuel to the fire when it came to this whole West Coast versus East Coast thing.
This bullshit about the East Coast and the West Coast started when we went out to New York to do the Source Awards. And Mr. Knight went on stage, and he's in New York City, and we all know Puffy's from New York City. I mean, the whole crowd started booing, and man, I thought to myself, like, why would you do that?
At another point during the award ceremony, you've got Snoop, a young Snoop, on the stage talking about some.
The East Coast don't love Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. The East Coast ain't got no love for Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg and Death Row. Y'all don't love us. Y'all don't love us. Well, let it be known then. We know y'all East Coast. We know we at East Coast and F.
Seeing Snoop like that back in the day and then thinking about how he is now is so funny. So knowing that this was pretty much a declaration of war at this point, I mean, he did everything but say, "Sir, I challenge you to a duel," and threw his, glove down. So what compelled Suge to make this speech calling Diddy out like this? When Suge made that visit to Tupac, it was right before the Source Awards, and Tupac had agreed to join Death Row during that talk they had. And during the talk, he vented his frustrations with Biggie and the Bad Boy label as a whole. He shared his belief that they had something to do with him getting shot in Quad Studios, and he wanted to destroy Bad Boy. He was out for blood at this point. And in response to this, Suge made the declaration of war at the Source Awards. For the record, I just want to say that there is no evidence that I've come across in my research that exists confirming that Biggie or Diddy had anything to do with that attack on Tupac at Quad Studios. I haven't been able to find anything. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of conspiracy theories. God, there's so many conspiracy theories when it comes to Biggie and Tupac as a whole. Like, don't even get me started. Nonetheless, the declaration of war drew lines in the sand and marked the beginning of what would become a deadly feud between East Coast and West Coast rap. The deaths of Tupac and Biggie mark a tragic time in hip-hop history, and their absence sent shockwaves on a global scale. And of course, there was a lot that transpired between Suge's declaration of war and the deaths of Tupac and Biggie that continued to fuel the flames. You know, it wasn't just, quad studio shooting, Suge brings on Tupac on a death row, Source Awards, you all in the video, and then Biggie and Tupac are killed. There's so much that happened in between the Source Awards and their deaths alone. This is my abridged version of events, because to really get into the nitty-gritty of that whole event in history would require a separate video. But anyway, I think a good example of one solid event, one little tiny event in the sea of events that happened in the in-between, was when Tupac released the song Hit 'Em Up. Oh my God, I vaguely remember when this song came out. I was super, super young, okay, but I remember it. And if you've never heard Hit 'Em Up, I'll just say that it is one of the most diabolical, most well-written diss tracks in history. Tupac, he just didn't hold back in this song, and he had smoke for everybody at Bad Boy. Some of them not even part of Bad Boy, just affiliated, they caught a stray by association. He had smoke for everybody, but especially for Biggie and Diddy. When he starts off with that first bar,
first off, fuck your bitch in the clique you claim.
Okay.
Okay.
You immediately know what time it is, okay? He comes for Biggie, Diddy, Junior Mafia, which was a group formed by Biggie that Lil' Kim and Lil' Cease were part of. Again, people catching strays. He even came for Bad Boy artist Faith Evans, who was Biggie's wife. And he also came for Mobb Deep, specifically Prodigy, for him having sickle cell.
I beg your pardon?
This man was ruthless in this song. I definitely not trying to laugh at Prodigy or his horrible illness and death. Is so unfortunate, but damn, just diabolical. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention that throughout the track, the phrase "take money" is said over and over, and this was a play off of the Junior Mafia track "Get Money," and the chorus is a play off of Junior Mafia's Players Anthem. So there's levels to this, layers to this diss track, and I just find it so funny that he came up with the "take money, take money."
Why subject us to this hell?
Even back then, they knew what Diddy was about when it came to his artists and the really shady business practices that he conducted. But Tupac was not the only one who fueled the flames to this beef. Biggie wasn't innocent. Before Tupac even came out with Hit 'Em Up, Biggie released a song called Who Shot Ya while Tupac was in prison. And it's been speculated that this was aimed at Tupac getting shot at the studio that day, because it was only released a few months after the incident. And I gotta say, it's pretty suspicious. I can't lie. The timing, the topic, a little sus. But all jokes aside, looking at this beef as a whole and knowing what comes of it in the end, it's really tragic. It's really sad. All right, so I had to re-record part 2 of this video because there ended up being a corruption issue with the file during the editing process. So that's why my background looks so different and I look so different. Let's pick up where we left off. It's one of the saddest, if not saddest, stories in hip-hop history. The rivalry came to a head when Tupac was pew-pewed in Las Vegas in September of '96. And then only 6 months later, Biggie was pew-pewed in LA. And I'm not gonna dive into all the various conspiracy theories when it comes to both of their deaths. This is a history channel, not a tea channel or a conspiracy theory channel, so I'm not getting into that. But shortly after the passing of Biggie, on May 27th of '97, Bad Boy released the single I'll Be Missing You. And it's a song that will become one of the label's biggest hits. I'll Be Missing You was a tribute to Biggie that featured his wife and fellow Bad Boy artist Faith Evans, as well as R&B group 112 and none other than Diddy himself. What was also significant about this track is that it sampled the song Every Breath You Take by the Police, and Diddy sampled it without permission. And the frontman of the Police, Sting, would go on to sue the label. I'll Be Missing You reached #1 in US charts and in countries all over the world like the UK, Germany, Spain, even in Sweden. And on top of that, it sold over 9 million copies. It also won Best Rap Performance by a Duo or Group at the 40th Grammy Awards. Now, if you haven't watched my video on how Diddy is notoriously known for being all in his artist videos as well as their songs, full disclosure, I hate this song so much, and I can't stress it enough. I think I've probably said it too much at this point. I don't only dislike this song because it just sounds like trash. I also find its existence, just period, as being very distasteful. I don't know the man personally, but obviously releasing a song that's supposed to be a tribute to your late friend after his violent passing with the intent to make a fuck ton of money off of it, it just doesn't sit right with me. In addition to the fact that Diddy maintained publishing rights to Biggie's catalog up until 2023, which we'll get into in part 3 of this series. But we're going to pivot a little bit from that in this portion of the video. Now I want to focus on the Bad Boy sound. Diddy wasn't the only driving force behind the production of Bad Boy music. There was a team of producers behind the scenes building the sound that defined the label, and they were called the Hitmen. And the Hitmen were a super team of producers responsible for crafting some of the most iconic records in hip-hop history and across the Bad Boy label. With Diddy at the helm, they shaped the beats, built the hooks, and crafted the musical identity of Bad Boy during its peak. So let's take a minute to talk about the Hitmen, how they worked, who they were, what music they were involved in, and why their influence still matters. The core lineup included Stevie J, D. Dot, Chucky Thompson, Nasheem Myrick, Carlos Brody, and Mario Winans, or Winans. My apologies. And there were a few others, but these seem to be the core people that made up the Hitmen when you look them up. And each one of these guys had their own distinct styles, but they were all working together towards this Bad Boy sound. Sometimes they were at Daddy's House Studio in New York, and then sometimes they go overseas to places like Trinidad. By the way, in case you didn't know this, Daddy's House was the official studio, music or recording and mixing studio of the Bad Boy label. And Diddy is just a creep. Diddy naming the Bad Boy recording mixing studio Daddy's House? This is so much to me, and what it must have been like to be a Bad Boy artist. I mean, having the name Puff Daddy alone is very telling, but I'm not gonna keep ragging on Diddy. I'm trying so hard to not make this a shit on Diddy video. You know, I want to try to keep my bias out of it, but I can't sit here and ignore the fact that this man named a recording mixing studio Daddy's House. That is disturbing. Like, just picture being a grown-ass man or woman talking to somebody like, yeah, what are you doing today? Oh, I'm going to Daddy's house. Naming the studio Daddy's House definitely plays into this idea that this space is his house. This is his empire, and these are his artists. This wasn't just a studio in my mind, and maybe I'm, reaching, but it's a metaphor for ownership and authority. And when you look at how many Bad Boy artists have since spoken out about their deals and royalties and publishing rights, the name is not only absurdly corny, but it's disturbing as well. But anyway, back to the Hitmen. So the Hitmen, they operated like a creative battlefield. Everyone in the studio pushed each other to top the last beat, and at the same time, it was a friendly competition. And Stevie J in particular was a major force. What's funny is, if you're anything like me and you like watching trashy television, I didn't know who the hell Stevie J was until I watched Love and Hip Hop. Sue me. And all I knew about this man is that he is an incredible womanizer, or actually let me rephrase that, incredible at womanizing. And he just gives off creepy uncle vibes. Like, is it just me? You know what I mean? Like, just the way he moved on Love and Hip Hop, it's like his whole overall demeanor, the way he looks at people when he talks, you know, the eye contact, the licking of the lips situation type of thing. When I found out, when I was introduced to him on Love and Hip Hop, after the fact, how important he was to music, I'm not gonna lie, I was shocked, because the whole time I was wondering, why is he here?
Respectfully.
The whole idea is that everybody on the show is supposed to have some type of connection to music, as minuscule as some of their connections may be. But anyway, it was crazy to find out what his impact truly was. As much as I find him to be a creep, I can't deny the fact that the man is a legend in the music industry. And before Bad Boy, he was actually touring with Jodeci. He was a touring musician with the group, and he played guitar, he played keyboard, he did background vocals. And during this time with Jodeci, he actually was discovered by Diddy during a studio session with the group Total, and he would go on to co-produce some of Bad Boy's biggest records, including tracks on Biggie's Life After Death album. And he also produced I'll Be Missing You, my favorite song. He was also involved with tracks under 112, Faith Evans, as well as Total. He also produced tracks for artists outside of Bad Boy, artists like Eve and Mariah Carey. And actually, during a Drink Champs podcast where Stevie J was interviewed, he would share how he often worked directly off of Biggie and what his vision was. So Big would walk in with just a vibe, like nothing but vibes at this point. And sometimes it would be a lyric, and sometimes it would just be a title. And Stevie would build an entire track around it, and that was their process. What the Hitmen did for R&B and hip hop, and really music as a whole, was really groundbreaking. So at this point in the Bad Boy timeline, we are in the year 1997, and Biggie and Tupac have passed away, and we are now in what is known as the shiny suit era. The shiny suit era was a period in the label that's during the late 1990s, and I can only define it as hip hop getting a high gloss makeover. The flashy music, the flashy videos and outfits, high production music videos really defined the shiny suit era. And it's often kind of looked down on. You know, the music consisted of sample heavy beats, polished production, and oftentimes a crossover style that blended the swagger of hip hop with an R&B appeal that was radio friendly. And when I think about this era of the Bad Boy label, really, you know, hip hop as a whole, I immediately think of Mase. You know, Mase would be the next artist signed to the label in 96, and for all intents and purposes, he really became the face of Bad Boy during this time, during the shiny suit era. Now, Mase was originally born in Florida, but he moved to Harlem, New York at a very young age, and throughout his entire career, he would rep his ties to Harlem heavy. And prior to signing on to Bad Boy, Mase was already doing his thing musically. He was part of the Harlem-based rap group Children of the Corn, which included fellow rapper Cam'ron. And Mase cited his sister as being one of the major driving forces behind him being signed to the Bad Boy label. His sister actually handed his mixtape to someone who then got it to Diddy, and then that led to a meeting where Mase was able to freestyle in front of Diddy. And if you're not familiar with Mase's music, his style is described as smooth, laid back, but energetic, and he's very nonchalant with the way he delivers his bars, but at the same time, it's a very catchy delivery, and this style made him stand out. The Bad Boy machine began building a name for Mase prior to the release of his debut album, and his actual debut was on the remix of 112's single Only You. I haven't really talked much about the group 112 yet. If you're not familiar with 112, they are an R&B group that was signed to the Bad Boy label in 96. I do want to take this time to just kind of give a little bit of a disclaimer note, whatever. I can't cover every single artist that was signed to Bad Boy across its entire history. Obviously, that would be insane. I mean, forget a 3-part video. This would be like a 12-part video. What I'm doing is I'm bringing up or focusing on artists that had very noteworthy involvement in different parts of the Bad Boy history timeline. That's not to say that all the artists or most of the artists signed to Bad Boy weren't noteworthy. You know, that's definitely not the case, but more so, this is an event that happened. You know, Biggie, Craig Mack, first artist signed to Bad Boy. Faith Evans, first woman, first lady of Bad Boy, first woman signed to the label. Total, first group signed to the label, that sort of thing. So just in case anyone was wondering. But anyway, so that was Mase's debut, his actual debut. And he also featured on some of Diddy's own tracks as well. And also, if you haven't picked up on it yet, Diddy is also an artist signed to the Bad Boy label. He has his own catalog. There's a saying in the music industry that it's actually a bad idea to sign to a label owned by an artist, but anyway, I'm going off tangent here. In late 97, Mase's debut album Harlem World was released, and it was met with praise. It spent the first 2 weeks on the top of Billboard charts. However, Mase was also met with a lot of criticism. Some criticized his bars, his flow, and he also received a lot of backlash for being part of the shiny suit era. Like I said, the shiny suit era gets shit from people sometimes. In comparison to that gritty, you know, in the trenches style of hip hop, the aesthetic Mase presented was much more flashy, glamorous, radio friendly. And I think a good example to demonstrate the dichotomy between Mase's whole image and brand with someone that's more, you know, gritty, street kind of hip hop, comparing Mase to the hip hop duo Mobb Deep, I think that's the perfect example. It's a jarring difference, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, one of the things I love about living in the year of our Lord 2025 is that it's okay to be a hip hop artist or rapper and not be about that life, rapping about your own personal experiences. Like Tyler the Creator, for example, I think that's a perfect representation. You would never see Nas coming out on stage with a blonde bob cut wig, although I would love to see that. But that's what makes hip hop so great today, is that, you know, we get people from all walks of life now that don't necessarily have to reflect that one story, that one life. But that's also not to say that there weren't artists that came out before now who weren't representing the street life. Shock G, for example, with his Humpty Hump persona, perfect example of a hip hop artist that's not a representation of that in the trenches, you know, form of hip hop. Anyway, I'm getting really down a rabbit hole, and I am not a hip hop expert. I'm sure there's some hip hop head is going to come across this and be like, what the hell is this woman talking about? She don't know what the hell she's talking about. But anyway, in addition to his aesthetic and his lyricism being criticized, some people viewed him as a mere sidekick to Diddy as well. Diddy and Mase were often in music videos and songs together quite a bit. Nonetheless, he was a commercial success and very profitable for the Bad Boy label. And as I mentioned, Feel So Good was arguably Mase's biggest song from Harlem World. But Mase was also featured on some very successful tracks outside of his own music, like Mariah Carey's Honey, for example. Mase would go on to release his second album, Double Up, under the Bad Boy label in '99. And then in April of that same year, Mase announced his retirement due to his desire to serve God and become a pastor. And yet again, Mase was met with much criticism. But then in 2004, he would actually return and release his final album, Welcome Back, under the Bad Boy label. And while his second and third albums achieved moderate success, they would come nowhere near the success of his first album, Harlem World. Throughout the years, Mase has been one of the most vocal Bad Boy artists about Diddy's shady dealings with the label's artists, and he has publicly accused him of withholding money, owning his publishing, and blackballing him. Mase even dropped a diss track against Diddy titled The Oracle 2 Standing on Bodies. While I cannot take the intense auto-tune throughout this track, I will say this much: the lyrics are powerful, and I feel like it really demonstrates, this song really demonstrates Mase's lyricism and his ability to really just send a message, you know what I mean? Just really articulate what he wants to say, what he's trying to say. I'm gonna give y'all a little snippet.
Oh, hell no, man. What the
I come with facts you never consider. I'm a ghost of shine. I speak of every artist never spoke their mind, representing every artist that was left behind. from Craig Mack to G-Dep. Now, I haven't talked about Shine yet in this series. Shine was another Bad Boy artist, and the events surrounding his time on the label, they're very core to the history of Bad Boy. We'll get into the artist Shine in part 3 of this series, the final installment of this series, as well as the labels, or aka Diddy's shady business practices, allegedly, and as well as the final 2 eras of the Bad Boy label and what is known as the Bad Boy curse. So we're gonna get into all of that. So this is where I leave you guys in part 2. Just a couple things that I wanted to mention before I wrap up this video. So I've been working on something very special for you guys, and it'll be coming out soon. It'll actually be coming out before the 3rd video of the Bad Boy series. So I'll be giving you a little break from Bad Boy, but I think it's a topic you'll really enjoy, and I can't wait to share it with you. And the last thing I wanted to say is I just wanted to thank everyone who has subscribed to the channel, who watches my videos. Your support means a lot to me. And as you may be aware, if you are familiar with my channel, or even not, because honestly all you gotta do is look at the subscriber count, the YouTube algorithm does not support your girl at all. I've been doing this YouTube thing this year, I think will be my 5th year. So the subscribers I do have and the people who return to my channel to watch my videos, I truly appreciate. So anyway, I'm stretching this out. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel and you really like my content, please subscribe, like the video, share it with a friend, share it with an enemy. I'll take them too. We need to educate everybody. Even our ops need to learn, right?